A heartwarming story of love, fate, and reunion. Young seamstress adopted twin babies. Years later, their real father came back as a CEO millionaire. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Let's get started. In the small, sun-dappled town of Franklin, Tennessee, nestled between rolling green hills and rows of sleepy houses, lived a young seamstress named Lena Brooks. At just 23, she had learned the art of stitching from her late grandmother, a woman whose hands had worked miracles with thread and fabric. Lena's tiny sewing shop, Brooks Tailoring and Repairs, stood at the corner of Maple Street, a humble, warm place where townsfolk came to fix torn sleeves, resize wedding gowns, or share a cup of coffee while waiting. She didn't make much money, but what she lacked in wealth she made up for with grace and quiet determination. Her days were long, her nights often lonelier, but somewhere deep down she believed her life had a bigger purpose. She just didn't know what it was yet. One rainy evening in early November, as the storm clouds burst open over Franklin, Lena locked up her shop and began the walk home under a flickering street lamp. The sound of rain tapping against her umbrella blended with the distant hum of thunder. As she passed the old St. Mary's Church, she thought she heard a faint cry, a sound so soft she almost dismissed it as the wind. But then it came again, higher, sharper, desperate. Her heart skipped. Instinctively, she turned toward the church steps and saw a small, soaked cardboard box tucked under the shelter of the stone archway. Her pulse quickened. She bent down and gently lifted the blanket that covered it. Inside were two tiny newborns, barely days old, their little faces red from crying and cold. Her breath caught as she whispered, "Oh my God, babies!" She immediately ran inside the church, shouting for help. But it was empty at that late hour. Without another thought, Lena wrapped her coat around the twins and dashed toward Franklin Memorial Hospital, her shoes splashing through puddles as she ran. By the time she arrived, her arms were trembling from the weight of the infants and the rush of fear. Nurses took them from her, rushing to warm and feed them. Hours passed as Lena sat in the waiting room, her wet hair dripping, her heart pounding with worry. When the doctor finally came out, he smiled gently and said, "They're going to be fine. You saved them just in time." Tears filled Lena's eyes as relief washed over her. She asked about their parents, but there was no record, no identification, just two silver bracelets on their wrists, one engraved Eli and the other Ethan. Days turned into weeks. The hospital contacted Child Services, who began searching for relatives or anyone connected to the abandoned twins. No one came forward. Every day after work, Lena visited the nursery holding the boys, singing softly, and feeding them when the nurses allowed. She could feel something shift inside her, a love deeper than anything she had ever known. People noticed how the babies calmed when she entered the room, how their tiny hands clutched her finger as if they recognized her scent. One evening as she rocked them to sleep, the head nurse said gently, "You know, Miss Brooks, they smile more when you're here than when anyone else is." Lena only smiled, though her heart ached with the thought of losing them when they were placed in foster care. When Child Services announced they hadn't found a family after a month, Lena did something that shocked everyone. She applied to adopt both boys. Her boss at the tailor shop, Mrs. Patterson, frowned when she heard. "Lena, you can barely afford your rent, let alone two babies," she said, her tone sharp but not unkind. Lena only replied quietly, "Maybe I don't have much, but I have love, and maybe that's enough." The adoption process was long, complicated, and filled with skepticism from social workers who doubted her financial stability. But Lena's sincerity, coupled with the letters of support from the local church and her community, eventually convinced the board. When she finally held the official papers in her trembling hands, she cried for a long time, her tears falling on the signatures like blessings. She wasn't just a seamstress anymore, she was a mother. The next few years were not easy. Lena balanced late-night feedings with long hours at her sewing machine. She often skipped meals to make sure the boys had milk and diapers. But despite the struggles, their tiny home was filled with laughter and warmth. She learned to sew clothes for them from leftover fabric scraps, turning bits of discarded fabric into tiny matching outfits. Every Christmas, she made them pajamas by hand, each pair embroidered with their initials. The townspeople watched with admiration as the young seamstress raised two bright, curious boys who adored her completely. Eli, the older twin by 3 minutes, was bold and adventurous, while Ethan was thoughtful and quiet, often sitting beside his mother, threading buttons onto strings as she worked. By the time the twins turned 5, Lena's shop had grown busier. Word of her craftsmanship had spread, and she began receiving custom dress orders from Nashville boutiques. Sometimes, customers noticed the two little boys playing near her workbench and smiled at the sight of them helping their mother with fabric scraps. "They're my best assistants," Lena would say proudly. At night, she tucked them into bed, telling stories about courage, kindness, and family. Though she never told them how she found them, she often whispered to herself before sleeping, "Maybe this was how fate meant to stitch us together." Years continued to flow like the steady hum of her sewing machine. The twins started school, brought home art projects, and proudly introduced Lena as their mom. She attended every school play, packed lunches with hand-sewn napkins, and watched as her boys grew into strong, compassionate souls. Life remained modest but beautiful. They lived in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment above her shop, filled with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of laughter. Each night, Lena sat by the window after the boys slept, gazing at the stars and wondering about the people who had left the twins behind. She didn't resent them, but sometimes she wished she could understand why. One particularly cold December evening, as snowflakes drifted down over Franklin, Lena closed her shop early. The twins were helping her decorate a small Christmas tree in their living room. Ethan placed the final ornament on top, and Eli switched on the lights. The room filled with a warm golden glow, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Lena looked at the two faces she had come to love more than anything, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. "You boys are my greatest gift," she said softly. Eli hugged her legs, smiling up at her. "And you're the best mom ever," he replied. That night, after the twins went to bed, Lena sat alone at her sewing table, mending a torn wedding dress. The fabric shimmered under the lamplight, white and delicate, almost magical. She thought about how fragile life was, how everything could change in a single moment, the way it had 12 years ago when she found those babies on the church steps. She didn't know then that her story was far from over, that somewhere far away, a man with the same piercing blue eyes as her son's was searching for the family he'd lost. But for now, in her small world filled with love and the soft rhythm of needle and thread, Lena Brooks was exactly where she was meant to be. 12 years later, the quiet streets of Franklin had changed. The old grocery store was now a cafe. The church had been renovated, and Lena Brooks's tailoring shop had expanded into a full-fledged boutique. Her hands still moved gracefully over fabric, stitching life into everything she touched. The twins, now 12, had grown into handsome young boys who carried her kindness and resilience in their eyes. Eli was adventurous, often tinkering with anything mechanical he could find, while Ethan preferred sketching designs beside his mother's sewing table. Their small family had become the soul of the town, humble, loving, and unshakably close. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in New York City, a man sat in a towering office overlooking the skyline. His name was Alexander Reed, the 35-year-old CEO of Reed Innovations, one of America's fastest-growing AI technology firms. To the world, he was the perfect success story, a man who turned heartbreak into ambition and built an empire out of brilliance. But behind the confident smile and crisp suits lived a hollow space in his heart. 12 years earlier, his world had collapsed when his girlfriend disappeared without warning. She had been pregnant, and when she vanished, she took his unborn children with her. He searched for years, private investigators, police reports, endless dead ends, until he finally accepted they were gone. Even as the company flourished, Alexander's nights were restless. He couldn't forget the faint sonogram photo he kept in his wallet, or the name bracelet prototypes he had once made. Eli and Ethan, the names they had chosen before tragedy struck. He carried them as a reminder of what he had lost. Every year on their supposed birthday, he donated millions to children's hospitals, silently marking the day with grief. His assistant and closest friend, Daniel, often found him staring at the photo and saying nothing. "You can't keep doing this to yourself," Daniel once said softly. Alexander replied, "If they're still out there, I'll know. Someday I'll know." That someday arrived unexpectedly. One afternoon, while scrolling through local charity posts online, Alexander froze. On the screen was a photo of a small-town seamstress delivering handmade clothes to orphaned children. Standing beside her were two boys, identical twins with dark hair and eyes as blue as his own. Around their wrists were two silver bracelets, old but unmistakable. His heart pounded violently as memories flooded back. "Zoom in," he whispered, leaning closer. Daniel, startled by his tone, did as told. The engraving on the bracelets was clear: Eli and Ethan, His hands trembled. "Find her," he said, voice cracking. "Find everything about her, now." Within hours, Alexander's team traced the woman in the photo. Lena Brooks, seamstress, single mother, resident of Franklin, Tennessee. He stared at her picture for a long time, her warm smile, her eyes filled with quiet strength. Something deep inside him stirred, a feeling that mixed gratitude and disbelief. Could it be? Could this woman have saved his children? He booked a flight for the next morning, ignoring his packed schedule and the board's protests. For the first time in years, work didn't matter. Money didn't matter. Only the truth did. When Alexander arrived in Franklin, the town seemed frozen in a different time. Slow, welcoming, untouched by the chaos of his corporate world. He found Lena's boutique easily. The sign above the door still read, "Brooks Tailoring and Design." Through the window he saw her hair tied back, her hands guiding fabric through a sewing machine. The two boys stood beside her, laughing as they sorted ribbons and buttons. For a moment Alexander couldn't move. He simply stood there, watching the family he'd dreamed of for years come to life before his eyes. Finally, he opened the door. The bell above it chimed softly. Lena looked up, her expression polite but curious. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked. Alexander's throat tightened. "You're Lena Brooks?" he managed to say. "Yes," she replied cautiously. He glanced at the twins, their faces so familiar it almost broke him. "Those boys," he said quietly. "Their names are Eli and Ethan?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, they are." "Why?" Alexander took a deep breath, his voice shaking. "Because they're my sons." The room fell silent. Lena's sewing machine stopped mid-stitch. The twins looked up, confused. "Mom?" Ethan whispered. Lena's lips parted, but no sound came. She stared at the man before her, tall, well-dressed, his eyes mirroring her son's. "There must be some mistake," she said finally, though her voice trembled. Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo of the bracelets. "I made these," he said softly. 12 years ago. For my unborn sons." Lena sank into her chair, her mind spinning. Could this be true? After all these years? She remembered the night she found the babies, the rain, the church steps, the box. "They were abandoned," she whispered. "Left outside St. Mary's." Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "Their mother. She vanished before I could find her. I thought they were gone forever." The boys stood frozen, their young faces a mix of confusion and awe. Eli spoke first. "You're saying you're our dad?" Alexander nodded slowly, tears spilling down his cheeks. "If what I believe is true, yes. I'm your father." In the days that followed, DNA tests confirmed what everyone already knew. The twins were indeed Alexander's children. The revelation stunned the small town. News spread quickly about the mysterious millionaire who had come to reclaim the sons he never knew. Lena struggled to process it all. For 12 years she had been their world. Mother, teacher, friend. Now a stranger with unimaginable wealth and power had entered their lives. She didn't know whether to feel grateful, threatened, or heartbroken. Alexander, for his part, was overwhelmed with gratitude. He visited the shop daily, watching Lena work and learning about the boys' lives, their favorite foods, their hobbies, their bedtime routines. "You gave them everything," he told her one evening. "You gave them life." Lena smiled sadly. "I just gave them love," she said. Life found them on its own. But there was a quiet tension between them, the fear that he might one day take them away. She couldn't bear the thought of losing them. One evening, Alexander invited them to New York. "Just a visit," he promised. "I want them to see the world I built, for them, even when I didn't know it." Reluctantly, Lena agreed. For the twins, the trip was a dream. They explored skyscrapers, rode in limousines, and stood on the rooftop of Reed Tower, looking out over the glittering city. Yet when Alexander asked, "Do you like it here?" Ethan answered softly, "It's amazing, but it's not home." Back in Tennessee, life began to find balance again. Alexander bought Lena a new shop and set up a college fund for the twins, but he never tried to replace her role. One evening, as the sun set over the small town, he visited her boutique again. She was locking up for the night when he said quietly, "I've built empires, Lena, but what you built, it's something I never could. You built a family." She turned to him, eyes glistening. "We both did," she whispered. They stood in silence for a long time, the twilight wrapping around them like a promise. Then Alexander said softly, Maybe we can stitch the rest of our lives together, not out of fabric, but out of family. Lena's heart trembled at the words. For the first time, she let herself believe that the pain of the past had led them exactly where they were meant to be. And as the twins laughed inside the shop, the sound of their joy blending with the hum of the evening air, Lena realized that sometimes fate doesn't take from us. It just takes the long way to bring us home.